Welcome back to Against All Odds, the channel that uncovers the forgotten stories of desperate courage and unconventional genius that history almost left behind. Navies are built on tradition, on discipline, on the awesome power of gleaming battleships and sleek destroyers, machines of war built at immense cost and operated by the book. But when the tide of war turns against you, when the enemy is at the gates and your fleet is shattered, the book gets thrown overboard. In those moments of ultimate desperation, when all hope seems lost, history is sometimes forged not by the grand admirals in their polished offices, but by the mavericks, the outcasts, the leaders who are just crazy enough to see an opportunity where everyone else sees only scrap. Tonight, we sail into one of those desperate moments. It's a story from the dark, early days of World War II in the Pacific, a time of retreat and defeat. It's the story of a ship, a rusted, obsolete, forgotten vessel destined for the scrapyard, a floating collection of junk that was considered more of a liability than an asset. And it's the story of a captain, a man pushed to the fringes, his career on its last legs, a commander whose unconventional ideas had earned him the label mad. His superiors gave him a scrap ship as an insult, a final dead-end command. They never dreamed that he and his crew of misfits would transform that worthless hulk into one of the most bizarre, terrifying, and surprisingly effective naval weapons of the war. This is the story of the mad captain who turned a scrap ship into a naval weapon. Before we cast off, if you believe that ingenuity born of desperation is one of the most powerful forces in history, then I need you on our crew. First, hit that subscribe button and make sure you ring the notification bell. It's the only way to ensure you get these vital dispatches. Second, hit the like button. It signals to command that our mission is critical. And finally, drop a comment down below. Let us know what country and city you're watching from. Seeing our global fleet assemble is what keeps us sailing. All right, make ready. Let's head to the forgotten docks. The air in Manila Bay in late December 1941 was thick with the stench of defeat. It was a humid, greasy cocktail of burning oil, scorched paint, and the damp metallic tang of fear. Just weeks after the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, the hammer of the Japanese Empire had fallen with shocking speed and brutality upon the Philippines. The U.S. Asiatic Fleet, a proud but hopelessly outmatched collection of aging cruisers, World War I-era destroyers, and a handful of submarines, was in full, desperate retreat. The skies, once American, were now owned by the seemingly endless swarms of Japanese Zeros and Betty bombers. The Cavite Navy Yard, the heart of American naval power in the Far East, was a smoldering, twisted junkyard, its workshop shattered, its dry docks choked with the sunken, mangled wrecks of ships that had been caught at anchor. For the men of the Asiatic Fleet, it was a daily nightmare of air raid sirens, near misses, and the grim, soul-crushing task of destroying what little they couldn't take with them as they fell back, island by island, towards the supposed safety of the Dutch East Indies. It was in this purgatory of smoke and retreat that Commander Jedediah "Jed" Stone found himself, a captain without a proper command, a man whose career was as battered and obsolete as the fleet he served. Stone was a throwback, a man out of time. At 45, he was considered old for a commander, his career progression stalled by a stubborn, almost pathological inability to play the political games of the peacetime Navy. He was a brilliant seaman, a gifted engineer, and an unapologetic innovator. But his mind worked on a different frequency than the rigid, tradition-bound naval hierarchy. His fitness reports were a litany of backhanded compliments. Exceptionally intelligent but prone to unorthodox solutions. Demonstrates remarkable ingenuity but struggles with established doctrine. A superb ship handler, but his temperament is challenging. He was the officer who, during a fleet exercise, had once jury-rigged a smoke generator from the galley's fat fryer to successfully screen a damaged cruiser. He was the man who had submitted a detailed, unsolicited, and utterly ignored proposal in 1938 on converting old cargo ships into makeshift aircraft carriers using jury-rigged catapults, a concept the Admiralty had dismissed as the ramblings of an eccentric. He was, in the hushed, condescending tones of the officers' club, Mad Jed Stone, His latest unorthodox solution, a desperate, unauthorized attempt to salvage a damaged submarine at Cavite by flooding its forward torpedo tubes to lift the stern, had failed spectacularly, nearly sinking a destroyer alongside it and earning him a blistering reprimand from Admiral Hart himself. He was, for all intents and purposes, finished. A man on the beach, waiting for a quiet, career-ending reassignment back to a desk in San Diego, if he was lucky enough to escape the Philippines at all. His command, assigned to him as a final cruel joke by a furious fleet admiral who wanted him out of his hair, was the USS Sea Serpent. The name was a grand, almost comical misnomer. The Sea Serpent wasn't a warship. She was a garbage scow, a self-propelled, rust-streaked, foul-smelling relic that had spent the last 20 years hauling refuse from the warships in Manila Bay out to the dumping grounds. She was an unclassified, forgotten auxiliary vessel, technically a Navy ship, but in reality, little more than a floating dumpster with an engine. Her hull was pitted and thin. Her single diesel engine wheezed and clanked like a dying man, and her top speed, on a good day, with a following wind, might touch 8 knots. She had no armor. She had no weapons, save for a single, pintle-mounted Browning M2 machine gun on the bridge, more for scaring off sharks than enemy aircraft. She was, in the chaos of the retreat from Manila, utterly, completely useless. She was destined to be scuttled, a final, ignominious end to a life of humble, forgotten service. But Admiral Hart, in a fit of pique after the submarine debacle, had barked, "Commander Stone, you seem determined to command a wreck. Fine. You are hereby assigned command of the USS Sea Serpent. Your orders are to keep her afloat and stay the hell out of my way." The laughter from the Admiral's staff had been audible. It was the ultimate insult, a command designed to humiliate, to break him. But Jed Stone wasn't a man who broke easily. As he stood on the garbage-strewn deck of his new command, watching the smoke plumes rise from the ruins of Cavite, smelling the defeat in the air, he didn't feel humiliation. He felt a strange, liberating sense of clarity. The old Navy, the Navy of rules and tradition and established doctrine, was burning, sinking, retreating. Its rigid structures had failed. Its beautiful by-the-book warships were being sent to the bottom by an enemy who refused to play by the rules. In this new, brutal reality, maybe unorthodox was the only thing left. He looked at his ship. It wasn't a garbage scow. It was a platform, a shallow-draft, self-propelled steel hull. Slow, yes. Ugly, undoubtedly. But it floated. And it had a large, open, reinforced central well designed for holding massive barges of refuse. It was a blank canvas. And his crew? They were the dregs of the fleet, a collection of misfits and troublemakers assigned to the Sea Serpent precisely because no other captain wanted them. Men on their last chance before a dishonorable discharge, old salts passed over for promotion, young sailors who couldn't seem to follow orders. They were undisciplined, cynical, and utterly without hope. They were, he realized, perfect. They were men with nothing left to lose, men who might just be desperate enough and crazy enough to listen to a mad captain. The idea came to him in a flash of manic, sleep-deprived inspiration born from the chaos around him. The Navy was destroying everything they couldn't save. Dumps of ammunition, torpedoes, sea mines, depth charges, all were being hastily prepared for demolition to prevent them from falling into Japanese hands. He saw sailors rolling live, armed Mark VI sea mines off a pier into the deep channel. He saw demolition crews wiring crates of depth charges. It was all being thrown away. A treasure trove of explosive power. And he had a ship, a slow, ugly, but functional barge. His mind, the same mind that saw a smoke generator in a fat fryer and an aircraft carrier in a cargo ship, started connecting the dots. The Japanese weren't just bombing Cavite. Their fleet was closing in, preparing for the amphibious landings that would seal the fate of the Philippines. Their transports and landing craft would have to come through the narrow channels leading into Manila Bay and Subic Bay. Channels that were supposed to be protected by the now shattered coastal forts and the retreating Asiatic fleet. But what if What if you could create a new kind of coastal defense, a mobile minefield, a weapon that wasn't just a static threat, but an active thinking, predatory one? His idea was both simple and utterly insane. He would turn the Sea Serpent into a Q-ship from hell, a Trojan horse bristling with scavenged, unconventional weapons. He wouldn't just lay mines, he would throw them. He would build a weapon that looked like harmless refuse, but functioned like a shotgun blast of naval ordnance. He gathered his crew of outcasts on the stained, stinking deck of the scow. They looked at him with sullen, defeated eyes, expecting another pointless speech from another officer who was about to abandon them. "Men," Stone began, his voice cutting through the humid air. "Take a look around you. The fleet is gone. The yards are burning. The rule book is in ashes. We have been left behind. We have been forgotten. They have given us this ship, this piece of junk, and they expect us to roll over and die with it." He paused, letting the grim reality sink in. "I have a different idea." He then laid out his plan, his crazy vision. They would raid the demolition dumps. They would liberate every sea mine, every depth charge, every torpedo warhead they could get their hands on. They would weld makeshift launch ramps and catapults onto the decks and in the central well of the Sea Serpent. They would not be a garbage scow anymore. They would become a naval demolition ship. They would disguise themselves as a local inter-island tramp steamer, a common sight in these waters, and they would hunt. They would steam into the path of the Japanese invasion fleet, not to fight them gun to gun, but to sow chaos and destruction in a way the enemy could never anticipate. They would get in close, under the guns of their destroyers, and then, at the last possible moment, they would unleash hell. A barrage of live armed sea mines rolled off the sides, depth charges launched from steam-powered catapults, torpedo warheads dropped like floating bombs. It wasn't a plan for victory. It was a suicide mission. It was a plan to go down fighting, to take as many of the enemy with them as possible, to write one last, bloody, defiant chapter in the story of the Asiatic fleet. It was, in short, completely, certifiably mad. He finished his speech, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning the faces of his men. He expected laughter. He expected mutiny. He expected them to tell him what the admirals had been telling him for years, that he was crazy. Instead, there was a long, dead silence. Then, a grizzled old chief petty officer, a man named Salty Mike Corrigan, who had a rap sheet as long as the ship's keel, spat a stream of tobacco juice over the side. "Well, Skipper," Corrigan growled, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his weathered face. "It's the stupidest damn plan I've ever heard in my 30 years in this man's Navy." He picked up a crowbar. "So, when do we get started?" The Sea Serpent did not just get a refit. She underwent a grotesque, furious metamorphosis. The next 72 hours were a blur of organized chaos, a symphony of thievery and desperate, manic invention, all set against the constant, percussive backdrop of the Japanese air raids and the whump of their own retreating army's demolition charges. Jedstone's plan was madness, but it was a contagious madness. It was a purpose. For the first time since the war began, the crew of misfits and outcasts, the men of the Sea Serpent, had a mission other than don't sink. They had a mission to fight. Salty Corrigan, the grizzled chief, became the high priest of this new lunatic religion. He split the crew into two teams, scroungers and fabricators. The scroungers, led by Salty himself, became the most daring thieves in Manila Bay. They requisitioned a flatbed truck and made nightly high-speed runs into the still-burning bomb-cratered ruins of the Cavite Navy Yard, a place the enemy bombers visited with religious regularity. They played a terrifying game of chicken with both the Japanese bombs and their own demolition crews. More than once, an air raid siren sent them diving into ditches, the ground shaking as a stick of bombs bracketed the very ammunition dump they were looting. "Grab the pineapples!" Salty would roar, referring to the Mark 7 depth charges, each one packed with 600 pounds of Torpex, a high-explosive mix that made standard TNT look like a firecracker. They wrestled the heavy, ash-covered 700-pound drums onto the flatbed, their muscles screaming, their lungs burning from the acrid smoke. Their greatest prize came from the sinking, half-submerged hulk of the submarine tender USS Pampanga. The ship was a gutted, blazing wreck, but her forward mine storage magazine had flooded before it could burn. Stone himself led the raid, taking a whaleboat at 0300, his men rowing through a slick of oil and debris. They worked for 2 hours in the dark, submerged up to their chests in foul, oily water inside the guts of the dying tender, using chain hoists and brute force to manhandle 12 massive 1-pound Mark VI sea mines out of their racks and onto a waiting barge. Each mine, with its distinctive spiky Hertz-horn contact fuses, was a delicate, terrifying thing. One clumsy move, one stray spark, one hard knock against the hull, and their entire operation would end in a microsecond, a flash of light visible all the way to Corregidor. But they did it. They towed their barge, low in the water, back to the Sea Serpent, like pirates returning with captured treasure. While the scroungers plundered the dying fleet, the fabricators, under Stone's direct, manic supervision, performed an unholy surgery on the garbage scow. They were not shipwrights, they were mechanics, electricians, and deckhands armed with welding torches they barely knew how to use. The result wasn't pretty. It was brutal. "I want ramps," Stone had declared, chalking lines on the steel deck, like a whale ship cutting in a whale, but in reverse. So they built them. They tore the steel plating off the damaged bulkheads of a wrecked merchant ship nearby, cut it into jagged, crude sections, and welded them to the fantail and both sides of the Sea Serpent's open well. The welds were ugly, bubbled, and thick as a man's thumb, but Salty tested them with a sledgehammer, and they held. These were the mine delivery ramps, angled just enough that the massive 1,000-pound spheres of death, held back only by a simple pin and cable release, could be rolled over the side with terrifying speed. The depth-charge catapults were Stone's masterpiece, his most mad invention. The Sea Serpent, being a garbage scow, had a small but powerful auxiliary steam boiler, used for cleaning barges and running pumps. Stone saw it as an engine of war. He ordered his engineers, the Snipes, to divert the main steam line. It was a mutinous, dangerous order. "Skipper, that pipe is for 150 psi saturated steam," the chief engineer protested, his face pale. "You try to run a la carte lines off it, you'll blow the boiler or scald every man on deck. We'll take that risk," Stone said, his eyes gleaming with a fanatic's light. "I need pressure, Chief. Give me pressure." They cannibalized steam pipes, heavy-duty valves, and 3 massive, 24-inch diameter cylinder sections from a destroyed destroyer's ventilation system. They mounted these 3 tubes on the forecastle, angled forward and outward, like a battery of bizarre, stubby mortars. Each tube was fitted with a crude piston and a quick-release valve tied to the main steam line. The plan was simple. Drop a 600-pound depth charge into the tube, hit the valve, and let 150 psi of superheated steam blasted 100 yards out into the water. It was a steam-powered shotgun. They tested it once, using a 55-gallon drum filled with sand. The resulting thwomp-thump was terrifying, a deep, wet explosion of steam and force that launched the drum in a high arc, sending it splashing into the bay 150 yards away, and simultaneously blew half the seals on the new pipe fittings, scalding a deckhand and sending the crew scrambling for cover from the hissing, white-hot steam. It was perfect. They just needed more gaskets. Finally, the camouflage. The Sea Serpent was too clean, too obviously Navy. She needed to look like a civilian, a harmless, local tramp steamer, the kind the Japanese would ignore until it was too late. Stone ordered his men to add junk. They piled the decks with rotting fishing nets, draping them over the newly installed mine ramps, hiding the deadly mechanisms beneath. They built a fake deck cargo structure out of salvaged lumber and tarps, a rickety hollow shack that cleverly disguised the 3 steam catapults on the bow. They took buckets of rust-colored paint and deliberately, artistically, streaked the hull, covering the haze gray, painting over the ship's official name and number. On the bow, in large, sloppy, badly formed letters, they painted a new name, Kawayan, the Filipino word for bamboo. It was a perfect disguise, seemingly weak, calm and hollow, but ready to spring. The final touch was the cargo in the central well. They loaded the 12 Mark VI mines onto their ramps, securing them with the simple pin release. They manhandled the 6 Mark VII depth charges into position near the catapults. They even managed to liberate 4 torpedo warheads, which they simply lashed to the deck, their contact fuses armed, ready to be rolled over the side like bombs. The Sea Serpent was no longer a ship. She was a single massive floating contact fuse. She was a 500-ton Claymore mine. On the third day, as they were applying the last of the fake rust streaks, the unthinkable happened. A Navy launch, gleaming with polished brass and carrying an officer in clean white khakis, pulled alongside. It was Commander Reynolds, a by-the-book destroyer captain from Hart's staff, a man who despised Stone's unorthodox reputation. He was there to inspect the scuttling preparations for the Sea Serpent. He stepped onto the deck and froze. He was not standing on a garbage scow. He was standing on an abomination. He saw the crude, jagged, unpainted ramps. He saw the hissing, leaking, jury-rigged steam pipes. He saw the live, horned sea mines gleaming with malice under the flimsy fishing nets. He saw the new, badly painted name. His face went from confusion to disbelief to a shade of purple rage that was almost impressive. "Stone!" he roared, his voice shaking. "What, in the name of God, have you done? This isn't a ship. This is a floating bomb. You've welded live ordnance onto an unarmored, unseaworthy garbage scow. This is the most insane, the most illegal breach of naval protocol I have ever witnessed. You've endangered this entire anchorage. I am placing you under arrest, Commander. Shut this madhouse down." Stone, who had been quietly watching from the bridge, walked down to the deck, his steps slow, deliberate. His crew, the 20 misfits, slowly emerged from the shadows, wrenches in hand, welding goggles pushed up on their foreheads, their faces streaked with soot and defiance. They didn't say anything. They just stood there. A silent, greasy, dangerous-looking wall of men, backing their mad captain. Stone stopped an inch from Reynolds, his gaze flat, cold, and utterly devoid of fear. "She is a floating bomb, Commander," Stone said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "That's rather the point. And she is unseaworthy, and she is illegal. But protocol, as you call it, is burning in that harbor, and procedure is retreating with the Admiral. This ship, Commander, this bomb, has a purpose, and we have a purpose. We are not scuttling. We are going hunting." Reynolds, outnumbered and suddenly realizing he was standing on a deck bristling with live explosives and surrounded by men who looked like they had absolutely nothing left to lose, took a step back. You are mad, Stone," he whispered. "You're a madman. You'll be court-martialed for this." "Probably," Stone agreed, a thin, terrible smile touching his lips. "But I'll have to survive first. And so will you." He nodded towards Reynolds' launch. "I suggest you get off my ship, Commander. You're upsetting the crew, and we have a tide to catch." Reynolds, speechless, defeated by a display of sheer, unadulterated insanity he had no protocol for, scrambled back onto his launch. As the boat sped away, Stone turned to his men. The Kauaian was ready. She was ugly. She was leaking. She was probably going to explode if she hit a large wave. And she was the most dangerous weapon in the entire U.S. Navy. "All right, boys," Salty Corrigan growled, breaking the silence. "You heard the man. Let's go huntin'." The Kauaian, born of scrap and spite, slipped her moorings in the pre-dawn blackness, a ghost detaching itself from a graveyard. Commander Jedediah Stone stood on the exposed, sandbagged bridge, his hands gripping the wooden wheel, not trusting his helmsman, not yet. He steered his floating bomb away from the relative safety of the harbor's minefields, past the sunken skeletal shapes of ships he had known, ships he had served on. He saw the proud, broken mast of the cruiser Olympia, Dewey's old flagship, a relic, now just another piece of junk like his own, waiting for the scuttling charge. He saw Commander Reynolds's launch, a small, dark shape near the harbor entrance, watching them go. He could almost feel the man's baffled, righteous indignation radiating across the water. Reynolds was probably already composing the court-martial cable in his head, reporting that Mad Jed Stone had finally, truly, snapped, stolen a ship, and sailed out to his death, endangering the fleet in the process. Good, Stone thought, a grim, cold smile touching his lips. Let them think I'm mad. Let them think I'm running. Let them forget us. The Kauaian was a terrible ship. She handled like a waterlogged coffin, overloaded by tons of scavenged steel, live mines, and depth charges. Her already shallow draft was now dangerously low. She steered sluggishly, the hull groaning in protest as she met the first gentle swells of the open bay, the flat bottom slapping the water with a sound like a giant beaver's tail. Her ancient single-screw diesel engine thrumming deep in her belly was a prayer. It was designed for slow, predictable circuits around the bay, not for a long-range, open-ocean hunt. It choked on bad fuel, it overheated, and its rhythmic thump-clank. Thump-clank was a constant, nerve-wracking reminder that it could fail at any second, leaving them stranded, a floating ammunition dump waiting for a single inquisitive Japanese patrol plane. Worse, though, was the steam. Stone's mad catapults, the 3 steam-powered depth-charge throwers on the bow, were a constant, hissing, leaking menace. The jury-rigged pipes, wrapped in asbestos and hope, dripped scalding water onto the deck. The air was thick with the smell of hot, wet metal and sulfur, a constant reminder of the 150 psi of live steam they were channeling, a contained explosion they were hoping to control. The crew, the misfits, had transformed. The sullen, defeated look was gone, replaced by a kind of wild, fatalistic, almost joyful energy. They were the damned, and they were finally on their way to hell, but on their own terms. They moved with a new, twitchy purpose, their eyes constantly scanning the gray pre-dawn sky, their hands never far from the release pins of the mines or the valves of the steam catapults. Salty Corrigan, his face a mask of grease and determination, was everywhere, tapping the crude welds on the mine ramps with a ball-peen hammer, checking the lashings on the torpedo warheads, hissing orders at the engine room to keep the steam pressure steady. "She holds, Skipper, she holds," he'd grunted to Stone, his voice full of a terrible pride. "She's ugly as sin and she smells like a whore's bathhouse, but she'll hold, long enough." On the bridge, Stone unrolled his charts. He was not a madman on a random rampage. He was a hunter, and he had a very specific, very deadly prey in mind. His years in the Philippines, his eccentric habit of studying local trade routes, fishing patterns, and tidal charts. It wasn't a hobby. It was intelligence. He knew, with a smuggler's certainty, that the main Japanese invasion force, the one aimed at Luzon, wouldn't try to force the heavily mined, or so they thought, entrance to Manila Bay. They would land to the north, in Lingayen Gulf. It was a wide, open bay, perfect for a massive amphibious assault. And to get there, the Japanese transport fleet, the slow, vulnerable, troop-laden Maras, would have to sail south, down the coast, through a deep-water channel that ran just west of the island of Luzon. They would be protected by a screen of destroyers, cruisers, maybe even a battleship. But the transports, the prize, would be in the center. "Course 290, Chief," Stone ordered, his voice cutting through the hiss of the steam. "We're going to the coast. We're going to hide in plain sight." For 2 agonizing days, the Kauaian chugged north, a pathetic 8-knot snail in a sea full of sharks. The tension was unbearable. Every smudge of smoke on the horizon was a potential destroyer. Every distant engine drone was a flight of zeros. They were completely, totally, hopelessly alone. Stone drilled the crew relentlessly, turning their terror into muscle memory. "Drill, drill, air attack, port side, look alive, look harmless." The men would scramble not to the M2 machine gun, a pea shooter that would only confirm their status as a target, but to their disguises. They would drape fishing nets. They would sprawl on the cargo shack on the bow, pretending to be lazy local fishermen, waving at the distant, circling Japanese reconnaissance plane. Stone watched it through his binoculars, his knuckles white, as the Kate bomber circled them, once, twice. It was a high-stakes gamble. The Kauaian with its ugly profile, its fake rust streaks, its deck piled with junk. It looked pathetic. It looked beneath notice. The Japanese pilot, looking for warships, for carriers, for cruisers. Saw only a local garbage scow, a worthless prize. The plane waggled its wings, almost in contempt, and flew on. Stone let out a breath he'd been holding for a full minute. The crew, shaking, let out a ragged cheer. The disguise had worked. The gallows humor was thick. The men, who had been strangers and outcasts a week ago, were now a single, fatalistic brotherhood. They played cards on the central well hatch, sitting feet away from 12,000 pounds of high explosives, arguing over a single precious pack of cigarettes. They nicknamed the 3 steam catapults the 3 Stooges, Moe, Larry, and Curly. Moe, the center tube, was the most powerful, its leaky valves hissing a constant angry threat. They held mock funerals for the depth charges, patting the 600-pound drums of Torpex like beloved pets. "This one's for Petey," one sailor muttered, naming a friend lost at Cavite. "This one's for the Arizona." They were men with no future, and it had made them utterly, terrifyingly free. Stone, on the bridge, rarely slept. He was a creature of pure, distilled purpose. He studied the charts. He watched the sky. He listened, using a primitive hydrophone, for the telltale high-frequency ping of destroyer sonar, for the low-frequency thrum of heavy screws. He was hunting a fleet. On the 3rd morning, as the sun's first rays burned the mist off the water, the lookout, a young eagle-eyed sailor named Kid Riley, his voice cracking, screamed from the masthead, "Smoke! Smoke on the horizon! Northwest! Dear God! Skipper! It's all the smoke!" Stone was on him in a second, his binoculars to his eyes. The kid was right. It wasn't 1 smudge. It wasn't 5. It was a forest of gray steel masts and black oily smoke plumes, advancing over the clean blue line of the sea. The Japanese invasion fleet. It was so big. Stone's hands, usually rock-steady, began to tremble. He could make out the high, distinctive, pagoda-like superstructures of Congo-class battleships. He saw the sleek, triple-funneled shapes of heavy cruisers, and zipping back and forth like angry sheepdogs were at least a dozen destroyers, their bow waves white and sharp. And in the center, the prize. A sprawling, slow, fat-bellied convoy of 20, maybe 30 troop transports. The Maris, packed deck to deck with the thousands of soldiers who were coming to conquer Luzon. Stone felt a cold, savage, almost holy rage fill his chest. This was it. This was the target. This was the purpose of his mad ship. "They see us?" Salty Corrigan growled, appearing at his elbow, his own binoculars trained on the fleet. "Not yet," Stone said, his voice a low, hard rasp. "We're just local traffic. A piece of floating junk. Just like we planned." The Japanese fleet was on a collision course. They would pass within a few miles, the transports well protected inside the deadly layered screen of warships. A conventional attack would be suicide. A submarine would be hunted down. A flight of bombers would be shredded by the fleet's anti-aircraft fire. But they weren't a conventional attack. "Skipper?" Salty asked, his voice tight. "What's the play? We try to pick off a destroyer?" "No," Stone said, his eyes gleaming with his mad light. "We're not attacking the destroyers. We're not attacking the cruisers." He lowered his binoculars and looked at his chief. "We're going to join them." Salty's jaw dropped. "Skipper? You mean sail with them?" "Exactly," Stone said, a terrible thin smile spreading across his face. "We're a lost, harmless, local freighter, trying to get to port, confused by the war. We'll blunder into their formation. We'll look stupid, harmless, until we are right. Beside those transports, until we can smell the rice cooking in their galleys." He turned to the bridge, to the voice pipe. "Helmsman, starboard 10 degrees. Bring us onto a slow intercept course with the center of that convoy." He turned back to Salty. "Get the men to their stations, Chief. Tell them to look bored. Tell them to look stupid. No one looks at the warships. No one even glances at them. We are a garbage scow, hauling bamboo." But have the pins on those mines ready to pull. Have the steam pressure at the red line. Have the torpedo warheads unlashed. Salty Corrigan stared at his captain, his eyes wide with the sheer, beautiful insanity of the plan. It was not a suicide attack. It was a Trojan horse attack. He began to laugh, a deep, barking, joyful sound. "Aye, skipper," he said, slapping the bridge railing. "Look harmless." "I goddamn love it." He turned and roared down the hatchway. "All right, you miserable bastards, stop looking so goddamn warlike. Get those nets out. Look like you're hauling pigs. We're going to a party." The chugging, uneven thump-clank. Thump-clank of the Kauaian's old diesel engine was a pathetic, solitary heartbeat in the vast open ocean. A sound of such insignificance it was almost swallowed by the hiss of the bow wave. But it was a steady heartbeat, pushing them, knot by agonizing knot, towards the most densely packed formation of naval power Commander Jedediah Stone had ever seen. The Japanese invasion fleet was no longer a smudge of smoke on the horizon. It was a city, a moving, gray steel city of death, bristling with guns, crowned with high pagoda masts, exuding an aura of invincible, arrogant power. The scale was breathtaking, terrifying. Stone, on his exposed bridge, gripped the wooden wheel, his knuckles white. Through his binoculars, the enemy was no longer an abstract concept. He could see the individual sailors on the decks of the destroyers, sleek, deadly Fubuki and Kagero-class ships, slicing through the water on the outer screen, their guns trained, their crews alert. He could see the high, imposing superstructures of the Kongo-class battleships and Nachi-class heavy cruisers at the formation's core, their massive 14-inch and 8-inch gun turrets silent, watchful, radiating pure menace. And in the center, the soft, vulnerable prize, a vast, sprawling gaggle of Maris, troop transports, hulls painted in mottled camouflage, their decks crammed with ant-like figures. The invasion force itself, thousands upon thousands of soldiers, blissfully unaware, probably eating their morning rice, just miles from their destination. The Kauaian was approaching the outer destroyer screen at a shallow, oblique angle, just as Stone had planned. She looked, for all the world, like a local inter-island freighter that had blundered out of a northern cove, confused by the sudden appearance of a massive fleet now trying to parallel its course, perhaps hoping to find safety within its numbers, or simply too stupid to get out of the way. Stone's crew, his 20 misfits, performed their roles with a gallows humor perfection. On the bow, Kid Riley, the young lookout, was frantically, comically waving a large dirty white flag as if in surrender or confusion. On the main deck, Salty Corrigan and 3 other men were languidly, clumsily, pretending to wrestle with a large fishing net, the one draped over the port side mine ramps, shouting at each other, looking utterly inept. One man, a cook named Greasy Pete, was even leaning over the side, pretending to be seasick. They looked harmless, they looked pathetic, they were a joke. And that, Stone had gambled, was their only shield. A fast-moving Kagero-class destroyer, its flag snapping in the wind, spotted them. It detached from the screen and cut across their bow, a sleek gray wolf coming to investigate a stray sheep. A signal lamp on its bridge began to flash. A sharp, angry, rapid clack, clack, clack. Identify. State destination. Alter course immediately. Stone, his heart a cold, hard knot in his chest, didn't respond with a proper naval signal. He ordered his signalman, a disgraced quartermaster's mate, to hoist a jumbled, meaningless string of international code flags, a signal that basically translated to, "I am confused and possibly lost." The destroyer slowed, its officers on the bridge now visible, staring at the Kauaian through their own binoculars, their white uniforms stark against the gray steel. Stone could feel their contempt across the 500 yards of water. This rusted, smoking junk heap wasn't a threat. It wasn't a Q ship. It was just trash, an annoyance. The destroyer's forward 5-inch gun mount, which had been trained on them, relaxed slightly. The signal lamp flashed again, slower this time, simpler. Danger. Turn south. Now. "Skipper?" Salty's voice, low and tense, came up the voice pipe from the main deck. "He's getting jumpy. He gonna shoot? No, Stone breathed, his eyes never leaving the destroyer's bridge. He's dismissing us. He's a professional warrior, Salty. He's busy. He doesn't have time for this. As if to confirm, the destroyer gave a final, impatient blast on its horn, and deciding the pathetic freighter wasn't worth the ammunition, began to turn away, accelerating to rejoin the screen. As a final, parting, get-out-of-the-way gesture, its aft 5-inch mount fired a single blank warning charge. The boom was sharp, echoing across the water, a puff of white smoke. The Kauaian crew, as rehearsed, reacted with panic, men running in circles, waving their hands, Riley on the bow falling over backwards in mock terror. The Japanese officers on the destroyer's bridge, Stone was certain, were laughing. They had just swatted a fly, and the fly, as the destroyer sped away, did exactly as it was told. Stone ordered the helm. Port 5 degrees. Look like we're turning south. But slow our speed. Slow it down to 5 knots. The Kauaian began its slow, ponderous, stupid turn, bleeding speed, appearing to comply. But the Japanese fleet, moving at a steady 12 knots, was passing them. The destroyer screen, satisfied, moved on, and the Kauaian, in its fake lumbering turn, was now slipping behind the screen into the slower, less protected waters of the main transport column. "Holy Mother of God, Skipper," Salty whispered, his voice coming up the pipe, all humor gone, replaced by a raw, terrible awe. We're inside." Stone said nothing. His hands were gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles were white. The gamble, the sheer mad audacity of it, had worked. They were in the wolf pack, disguised as a sheep. The world was now a forest of massive gray and red-painted hulls. The transport ships were everywhere, huge, wallowing 10,000-ton Maris, their decks black with soldiers who stared down at the Kauaian as it chugged pathetically between them, some waving, some laughing, some just ignoring them. The stench of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and cooking fish wafted across the water. They were so close. So damn close. Stone felt a cold, predator's calm settle over him. His madness was gone, replaced by a chilling, mathematical precision. He had one chance. One. He couldn't attack them all. He had to make it count. He identified his primary target, the Naniwa Maru, a massive modern 12-Zoroton transport that looked like a converted passenger liner. It was the flagship of the transport column, probably carrying the invasion force's command element, its staff, its communications. Sinking it wouldn't just kill troops, it would decapitate the invasion. It was 300 yards to port, sailing parallel, a perfect, beautiful, arrogant target. "Chief," Stone said into the voice pipe, his voice a low-level rasp. "Full steam pressure. Now, stand by all stations." "Pressure's in the red, Skipper." Salty's voice came back, tight. "She's gonna blow, but she'll hold for a minute. That's all we need." Stone looked at his ship, his crew, the misfits, the forgotten. This was their moment. He took the brass megaphone from its hook. He stepped out onto the bridge wing, in plain sight of the thousands of enemy soldiers staring at him. He raised it to his lips, his voice a raw, primal roar that ripped across the water, across his own decks. "All stations, execute." It was as if a switch had been thrown, transforming the bumbling, pathetic garbage scow into a furious, mechanized porcupine of death. The lazy crew, who had been lounging on deck, exploded into action, their movements a blur of practiced, violent precision. "Pins pull! Port side!" Salty Corrigan screamed, his voice cracking with adrenaline. 2 men, stationed by the portside mine ramps, swung sledgehammers, striking the massive steel release pins. Clang, clang. The pins shot free. The 3 100-pound Mark VI mines, their Hertz horns bristling, began to roll. Slowly at first, then faster, rumble, 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 down the short, steep, jury-rigged ramp over the side, and splash, splash, splash. They disappeared into the water, just 200 yards from the Naniwa Maru, their hydrostatic triggers set to arm in seconds, their contact fuses thirsty for steel. "Starboard side, pins pull! Clang, clang, splash!" 3 more mines rolled off the other side. aimed at the next transport in line, a smaller, 8-0-ton ship. "Bow catapults! Stand by!" Stone roared. On the bow, the Three Stooges crew, led by Kid Riley, were stuffing the 600-pound depth charges, the pineapples, into the mouths of the steam-powered tubes. "Fire, Mo!" Stone screamed. The man on the valve, a huge stoker named Tiny, wrenched the lever. Thwomp! A massive, deafening geyser of superheated steam erupted from the center tube, a sound like a giant's cough. The 600-pound drum of Torpex shot out, tumbling end over end, a black, ugly punctuation mark soaring in a high arc. It flew over the water, over the transport's railing, and crashed onto the center of the Naniwa Maru's wooden main deck, right in the middle of a packed formation of stunned, staring soldiers. "Fire, Larry! Fire, Curly! Thwomp! Thwomp!" The other two catapults fired, sending their deadly cargo arcing towards the same ship, one smashing into the base of the bridge, the other just missing the stern. "Warheads!" Salty roared. "Roll the warheads!" The two 100-pound torpedo warheads, lashed to the deck, their contact fuses armed, were simply heaved over the side by 6 straining, screaming men, a final, desperate "fuck you" to the laws of naval warfare. The Japanese on the Naniwa Maru were frozen, paralyzed by sheer, uncomprehending shock. They were staring at the hissing 600-pound depth charge that had just landed on their deck. They were pointing at the strange, rusty ship beside them, the ship that was now throwing bombs at them. It was a moment of pure, surreal disbelief. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, and then the first mine hit. The Mark VI, its hydrostatic trigger armed, its chemical-filled Hertz horns brushing against the Naniwa Maru's hull, made contact. The Kauaian was less than 200 yards away when the world ended. It was not a boom, it was a physical event. A column of water, mud, steel, and fire erupted from the side of the transport, a pillar of pure, unrestrained violence that climbed 1,000 feet into the sky. The sound was a deep, chest-caving thump crack that struck the Kauaian with the force of a tidal wave. Stone was thrown from his feet, smashing against the bridge bulkhead, the world going white. The entire 500-ton scow was lifted bodily out of the water, then dropped back down with a hull-shattering slam that snapped the mainmast like a twig. But the mine was just the beginning. The shockwave from the mine detonated the depth charge that had landed on the transport's deck. Boom! A secondary, even more massive airburst explosion tore the Naniwa Maru's superstructure apart, sending a storm of shrapnel and body parts scything across the water. The depth charge that had landed near the bridge cooked off in the ensuing fire. Boom! The bridge just vanished. The Naniwa Maru, a 12-0-ton ship, her hull ripped open by the mine, her insides pulverized by 2 600-pound Torpex charges, didn't just sink. She capsized. In the space of maybe 30 seconds, she just rolled over, like a dead whale, exposing her red-painted belly, and began her final, gurgling plunge, taking thousands of trapped men with her. The chaos in the convoy was instantaneous. The second transport, the one targeted by the starboard side mines, was hit. Boom, boom, another flash, another column of water. She was crippled, listing heavily, on fire. The floating torpedo warheads, bobbing in the carnage, were struck by debris from the first explosion and detonated sympathetically. Whump! Whump! 2 more massive waterspouts, the center of the Japanese invasion fleet, the secure, protected heart of their operation, had, in less than 1 minute, been transformed into a charnel house, a lake of burning oil, pulverized steel, and screaming dying men. The Japanese escort fleet, the battleships, the cruisers, the destroyers, were going insane. They thought they were under attack by a wolf pack of submarines, or a massive air raid. They were firing everywhere. Their anti-aircraft guns were pouring streams of tracers into the empty, clear blue sky. Their destroyers were racing in circles, dropping depth charges at random, the whump-whump-whump of their own ordnance adding to the cacophony. They were in a state of total blind panic, firing at ghosts. And in the very center of this maelstrom, this hell of their own making, sat the Kauaian. She was mortally wounded. The force of the explosion so close had shattered her. Her engine was dead. Her hull plates, already thin and rusted, had buckled, and she was taking on water, fast. The main steam pipe, as the chief engineer had predicted, had burst, filling the engine room with scalding steam, killing him and his men instantly. But she was afloat. Battered, sinking, but afloat. Stone pulled himself up, his face cut, bleeding, his ears ringing so badly the world was just a high-pitched scree. He looked out over the carnage. He saw 2, maybe 3 transports sinking, a dozen others scattered, their formation broken. He saw the Japanese warships firing at shadows. He saw his crew, the men who were still alive. They were on their feet. They were burned. They were bleeding. They were cheering. A wild, savage, insane roar of pure, exultant triumph. Salty Corrigan, his face a mask of black soot, was at the M2. 50 cal, the only weapon they had left, and he was firing it, thump, 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 at the towering, pagoda-like superstructure of a Congo-class battleship a mile away. A gnat, spitting at a god. It was the most beautiful, most defiant thing Stone had ever seen. A Japanese destroyer, the Inazuma, finally saw them. Saw the source. Saw the low, black, smoking, sinking junk heap that had, impossibly, just decapitated their convoy. Her 5-inch guns, all of them, turned, traversing with a smooth, deadly hydraulic speed. They were point blank, less than 1 Zuausern yards. Stone looked at Salty. Salty, still firing the M2, looked back. He grinned, a bloody, gap-toothed, magnificent grin. He gave his mad captain a thumbs up. Stone turned to face the destroyer. He stood tall in his tattered uniform, on the bridge of his sinking, victorious scrap ship. The destroyer's guns flashed, a ripple of orange fire. This, Stone thought, was a good death. This was a very good death. The ripple fire from the Inazuma's 5-inch guns was not a salvo. It was an execution. Stone, standing tall on his bridge, saw the flashes, a beautiful, terrifying, final string of orange stars across the gray hull of the destroyer. He didn't even have time to register the whistle of the incoming shells. The world simply and absolutely ceased to exist. The first high-explosive shell, fired at point-blank range, struck the Kauaian's jury-rigged bridge, vaporizing Stone, the helmsman, and the makeshift structure in a single, blinding, white-hot flash. The second and third shells plunged directly into the ship's open central well, a space still lined with unspent depth charges and stray ammunition boxes. The Kauaian, the floating bomb, the Kauaian that had been built on a foundation of pure, volatile ordnance, fulfilled its ultimate, inevitable destiny. The resulting explosion was not a naval detonation, it was a volcanic event. The entire 500 in hull of the scrap ship, along with the remaining tons of torpex, sea mines, and torpedo warheads, detonated simultaneously. It was a single, colossal crack boom that dwarfed even the mine explosions that had destroyed the Naniwa Maru. A column of fire, steel, and water erupted 1,000 feet into the air, a miniature sun that momentarily blinded the gunners on the Inazuma and was seen clearly by the retreating American forces on the shores of Luzon, miles away. The Kauaian was not sunk. She was obliterated, vaporized, erased from the surface of the ocean in less than a microsecond, taking her entire, valiant, misfit crew with her into that column of fire. On the bridge of the Inazuma, confusion reigned. The Japanese captain, who had just given the order to sink the insignificant, annoying freighter, watched in stunned, deafening silence as his target disappeared in an explosion that was wildly, impossibly disproportionate to the vessel's size. The shockwave hit his own destroyer like a physical blow, shattering windows on his bridge, knocking men off their feet. What was that? A Q ship? A massive disguised mine lair? A submarine mothership? He ordered his lookouts to scan the wreckage, a patch of bubbling, debris-strewn, oil-slicked water, for survivors, for clues, for the submarine he was sure must be lurking underneath. They found nothing. No survivors, no submarine, just the splintered, burning remnants of fishing nets, shattered lumber, and the twisted, floating corpse of a single, massive sea mine that had been thrown clear. The captain stared at the carnage his fleet had sustained. The Naniwa Maru already gone, 2 other transports settling, a 4th burning furiously, his entire convoy scattered and in a state of blind panic, firing at phantoms. All this from a garbage scow. It was incomprehensible. It was mad. The sheer, unorthodox audacity of the attack vector. A disguised, civilian-looking surface ship sailing into the center of a battle fleet to unload a barrage of mines and improvised catapults. It wasn't in any naval textbook. It defied all logic, all doctrine. And it had worked. The Japanese invasion of Lingayen Gulf was thrown into chaos. The loss of the Naniwa Maru was catastrophic. With it went the invasion's command element, its primary communication center, and over 2,000 veteran troops. The loss of the other transports, combined with the sheer terror and confusion sown among the fleet, forced the Japanese commander to halt the advance, to pull back, to regroup, to spend precious hours sweeping for phantom submarines and ghost ships that didn't exist. The invasion was delayed by a critical 24 hours, a single day of grace bought for the doomed defenders of Luzon, paid for in blood and fire by a crew of 20 men on a ship that shouldn't have been there. Back in the relative burning safety of what was left of the American Naval Command, Commander Reynolds's cable, sent via flash traffic from Corregidor, was met with stunned disbelief. It was a report of pure, baffled conjecture. It confirmed, based on multiple high-altitude observation posts, that the main Japanese transport column had been engaged, that it was in chaos, that multiple ships, including a massive Maru, were confirmed sunk or sinking. But the source was the problem. The observation posts reported no Allied submarine activity in the area. No Allied air assets had been deployed. The only vessel in the vicinity, the only ship seen entering the Japanese formation, the only vessel destroyed in the massive ensuing explosion, was a single unidentified freighter-like vessel that perfectly matched the description of the USS Sea Serpent. The same Sea Serpent that Commander Reynolds had just reported as stolen, presumably scuttled, by its mad and insubordinate commander, Jedediah Stone. The Admiralty staff was faced with an impossible conclusion. Mad Jed Stone, the man they had dismissed, ridiculed, and exiled to a garbage scow, had not run. He had not scuttled. He had, in an act of spectacular, suicidal, and brilliant defiance, taken his scrap heap, armed it with scavenged junk, sailed it into the teeth of the most powerful fleet in the Pacific, and landed a blow more damaging, more effective, than the entire combined effort of the Asiatic fleet in the preceding weeks. The Kauaian and her crew of misfits were never recovered. Their names were simply added to the long, tragic list of those missing presumed lost in the fall of the Philippines. There were no medals, no posthumous citations, no grand fleet funeral. Their victory was too strange, too unorthodox, too mad to be easily digested by the rigid, tradition-bound Navy. It was a victory born of calculated insanity, a breach of every regulation in the book. It couldn't be celebrated, it could only be classified, but in the secret after-action reports, in the hushed, disbelieving stories traded in the dark bars of Pearl Harbor and later in the halls of the Naval War College, the legend was born. The legend of Mad Jed Stone and his ghost ship, the garbage scow that turned into a battleship. He had taken a symbol of their defeat, a worthless, rusted, forgotten hulk, and he had forged it, through sheer defiant will, into a weapon. He had proven that in the crucible of war, in the moments of total, abject desperation, the most powerful weapon in the arsenal isn't the billion-dollar warship. It's the human mind, the unconventional mind, the crazy mind that refuses to accept the rules of defeat, the mind that sees a weapon where others see only scrap. Stone and his crew, the forgotten men on their forgotten ship, had sailed into legend, their final, defiant, victorious roar, a testament to the idea that as long as one mad captain is willing to fight, the war is never truly lost.